Hi, Christopher. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. I always let my guests do the honor of introducing themselves to the listening and watching audience. So I'm going to kick it back to you real quick and allow you, in your own words, to tell everybody who you are and what you do.
My name is Christopher August. I am a master breathwork facilitator, a transformational guide, devoted father. I wear many hats, many identities, and all of that. But beyond everything, really just honing in on my core mission and why I'm here. And one of the greatest reasons for what I do and why I do it in the world is to really support people in their healing and their transformation and their awakening. And right now, as we know, the planet is going through a massive shift. There's lots of chaos, and we're all having to go through our own sort of darkness, our own shadow individually and collectively. And really, my intention is to support people with the tools, practices, and resources to be able to navigate that journey and be able to step into a greater, more empowered and authentic version of themselves.
I'm excited to dive into all of that with you today and to hear your perspective and what you've been learning. I think the pandemic was also a great equalizer for awakening. So I think we're still on that path, and it's really beautiful. We're also going to dive into like your early childhood experience, but in the vein of that, I'm always interested in where each of my guests start out in their relationship with spirituality or religion or nothing at all, and then how they've come along this path to practice whatever it is you're grounded in today. So what was your early, like, where did you get plunked in early on as a child, and then where are you now? Walk us through that journey.
It's been interesting because as a child, I was always very sensitive and intuitive. I can really sense my environment around me. And I lived in a little bit of a chaotic household. There was a lot of fighting between my parents. So being this open-hearted child, I was like taking on all of this, right, as my own. And as I got older, I had to learn how to sift through all of that. But really, when my spiritual journey started was in around 2008. I was given a book called Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And that book was very instrumental. It was a catalyst on my journey and really helped me to begin to understand a lot of the things that I intuitively already knew about past lives and reincarnation and all of that. And so it was from that point, I started to really ask more of the deeper questions like, who am I? Why am I here? How am I meant to be of service in any way? Those questions really led me down the rabbit hole where, at that point I was following the status quo. I was just finishing college and I was then going to get my master's degree in business leadership and working at a tech firm. And so all of these things at that point were great on paper, but inside I felt extremely lost and empty. And so I decided to put out a prayer, put out an intention that I really desired something different. I wanted to do something different. I knew deep down I was here to make an impact. I knew deep down that I wanted to travel and really fulfill all of these core values. But my current reality of working at this corporate job, partying on the weekends, doing all of these things, it was fun, but it just got to the point where I was burnt out and I was tired. And so I ended up through synchronistic events, I ended up finding the Peace Corps. For anybody that doesn't know what the Peace Corps is, it's an American governmental grassroots organization supporting people from all over the world in 80 different countries and these different sectors of health, agriculture, business, and so forth. And so I ended up going and researching all of this after seeing a sign on a billboard saying, "Are you ready to answer the call?" And for me, that really spoke to me. And so a year after going through the application process, I got in and I was sent to Tanzania, Africa, where I lived and worked in a remote village for 2 years of my life. And it was really during that time, my deeper spiritual practices began. That was in around 2012, 2013, and really began to go deeper within myself to kind of clear out the cobwebs and, really begin to understand my consciousness on a deeper level. So I'll stop there, but that's really how my journey started. And of course it hasn't stopped as it's always ongoing, but those were major turning points for me.
Yeah, I read in your story about going to Tanzania, which I thought was really beautiful and interesting. I also did have a question for you as growing up as a sensitive child. From the male perspective, I don't know that I've had somebody actually articulate that on the show. I'm also very sensitive too, and I grew up also very much in a dysfunctional family. And I deeply empathize with what you said back there. But I wondered, like, from your perspective, with just like the general societal messaging you get as a boy, like a young boy, how did you even navigate being sensitive and intuitive? Like that just seems like it would be really difficult on top of just all of the other muckety mucks going on.
Yeah, it's a great question because I remember specifically as a child, like not having that sort of fear of expressing my emotions, especially early
Hmm.
on. But I do remember getting to the point where around 9, 10, 11, 12, going into puberty and all of that, where I began to shut myself down emotionally, specifically in my household with my mom and
Mm,
stuff, and really closing down my heart in a way. And that's been a major part of my journey as a man, has been really learning how to open my heart and how to live with an open heart, even in a society that obviously tells you the opposite, in which I think you're hinting at. And I think the
hmm.
biggest thing for me specifically on my journey that has brought me the most healing and helped me to open my heart is actually interfacing and connecting with other men that are doing the inner work. And that's why men's work
Yeah.
for me is super important, because there's a lot of programming and conditioning out there that tell men something completely different. And so when men can come into those spaces together, they really activates that heart energy. And I really feel right now, as a whole, as a collective, this world is in dire need of really integrating those feminine aspects, not from a gender perspective, from a energetic
Hmm.
perspective, into ourselves, whether you're male or female, because we've been existing in a hyper masculine state as a collective, whether in
Yeah.
both males and females are in this sort of loop, in this programming, this trauma cycle where their nervous systems are in fight or flight. And so, long story short, that has been my core of my journey, has been learning how to live with an open heart and to perpetually live my life from that place of sensitivity and embrace my intuitiveness.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And that distortion of the masculine and feminine energy, it really does affect all of us in like very different ways. I sort of think about it as like a sliding scale in different sort of like parameters, like for men, cutting down those emotions and things like that. And in women, I feel like we've been asked to show up masculine like in the workplace, and it feels sometimes out of our own nature, and also isn't well received, but it's being asked of us. And like you look at that from both perspectives, and I think you can just see there's just a lot of suffering in the distortion and in the oppression of not allowing people to appear and present as their authentic selves. It's just I think the world would be such a different place. I think we're getting there every day. I think we're making strides every day to allow people the luxury and the dignity of being themselves as we move on.
100%. And very well said.
You mentioned your breath work back there, which you're a big breath work proponent and practitioner, and then you also have a mobile app called Beats and Breath. But I wondered if we might talk to the audience just as a baseline to rediscover what breath work actually is, maybe define what it is, and then talk to us about what you're doing with breath work, why it's important for you to have this kind of practice, and how people can incorporate it more into their lives to sort of stay centered and grounded.
Mm, yeah, a beautiful question. And breath work in itself, and let's just break it down. The breath itself is life. It's everything. If we don't have breath, we don't have life. And when we breathe, we are connecting with the deeper levels of ourselves. That's when we get into a more metaphysical, spiritual level. But on a base level and on a physical level, we are coming back into our center, where most of us are in this space, in this place within ourselves where we're overwhelmed, we're busy, we're chaotic, we're anxious, all of these things that we're putting all of our energy, just as we talked about, is in the hyper masculine state. We're doing so much, thus creating an imbalanced nervous system where we're existing in a sympathetic state. So just on a base level, the breath can help you anchor back into yourself, finding that place of center, finding that place of calm. And so breath work, the practice, is essentially, the way I like to define it, is an active form of meditation that uses the intentional power and your consciousness to tune in with your breath. And by doing this for maybe a minute, 2 minutes, or even longer, doing, 30, 40-minute breathwork journey where you're continuously working with the power of your breath, what that can do for you on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level is beyond anything I've accessed. Now, I've done plant medicines, I've done some different psychedelics and things like that that have been instrumental, but the breath is your own inner pharmacy. And when you can access the breath and use it in a way to manipulate and transform energy, you in yourself begin to transform. And so for me, it's been a foundational practice. And, it's interesting because we breathe over 20,000 times per day, but most people do not pay any attention to their breath. And if they do, maybe it's just a few percent of that, 100% of the time where we're not actually looking consciously at how we're breathing. And therefore, most people are breathing shallow. They're breathing either fast or shallow, where they're not actually breathing deep into their belly and breathing deep into their diaphragm. And when we begin to bring some awareness to our breath, our life begins to shift on many levels. And the breath can be associated with not only our health and well-being, but can be associated with better, cognitive function, focus, clarity, deeper connection with self, purpose, manifestation, abundance, prosperity. You can literally bring breath into every different aspect of your life, and it will begin to transform you. And so for me, discovering the power of breath, over a decade ago, and now teaching it and facilitating it, it has deeply transformed my life and the lives of thousands of others. And I'm grateful to be a conduit and a channel for that energy to come through. And so, yeah, it's very, very powerful.
It's so powerful. It's so interesting too, when you go on this journey and you come into contact with breath work, how much you realize, number one, like you have a very activated nervous system if you've had any trauma or dysfunction in your life up until that point. But also that, like you said, how either shallow and dismissive we are of our own breath throughout the day. It's really interesting. I catch myself even today still, like, I'll be working all day and realize like I've never really breathed deep, or I haven't gone outside to like take a moment because I'm get so busy and stuff. And the breath work is so, I think, integral to our health on, like you said, on so many levels that are larger than just taking a breath. Like it's mental health, it's our nervous system, it's all of these beautiful things. And so what is the Beats and Breath mobile app though, since we're on this conversation? So if and nobody's heard of that, and I saw on your website, but are you doing like binaural beats over there? What's happening on that app?
Yeah, so Beats and Breath is our brand where we sort of bring all of our breathwork offerings through, right? And my partner and I, Johnny, we've created a technology and a practice called Sonic Breathwork. And Sonic Breathwork is essentially combining and blending, fusing together ancient rhythmic breathing practices, pranayamic breathing practices, with modern cutting edge musical compositions. And so when you bring together the healing powers of breath and sound, which really are the foundational powers of the universe, you begin to create deep healing and transformation. And so for anybody that is new to breath work, we really make it accessible, fun, like really cool to breathe, right? So, because we're bringing in ancient instrumentation in the sense of these native flutes and different instruments on top of like, 808 trap and hip hop beats. And then we infuse binaurals and solfeggio frequencies into that. So it makes it fun to breathe, right? And that's the thing. Like we wanted to make it approachable for anybody, whether you're a beginner or you're advanced, you can go quite deep with this work. And so the technology part of it with the app, we just wanted to make it accessible for everybody. So with that, we have all different breathwork journeys on there. We have meditations, we have sound healings and all of that. But, really, I guess just to sum everything up and really why the breath is so incredibly important is we've already stated the problem. We're in this state of overwhelm and chaos internally and externally. And so when we find that place of relaxation, when we find that place of presence within ourselves, everything begins to open up. We begin to see the world with new eyes. We begin to perceive ourselves from a completely different lens. And all of the overwhelm of the thoughts, the mental chatter, when the volume of that begins to turn down, our intuition, the voice of our soul begins to turn up, and we begin to lead ourselves in our lives from a completely different place where it's not ego led, it's soul led. And when we can lead ourselves from that place, our life, the way we make decisions, the way we live, the way we eat, the way we move, everything changes on a cellular level as well as on a very physical level. And so that's why, if I could state the power of breath, like that is why it's so incredibly important to work with your breath on a conscious level like this.
It's really powerful. I love that you all try to make it accessible too, because there is still a lot of confusion and stigma around meditation and breath work, and sometimes people still think it's pretty woo woo, but it's almost our natural state of being if we start practicing that breath work. And the breath can take us to so many beautiful places, like you just described there. It gives us access to our own wisdom when we're in meditation as well, and even other earthly realms and beings and abilities to see so much outside of this physical landscape, which is really, I think, very confronting if you go down that path with breathwork, but also very interesting to be able to see what is actually out in our energetic field without being in our physical bodies when we're doing that breathwork. It's really, really beautiful. I love that you guys created an app like that, and that sounds really wonderful. I wanted to talk to you as well about your work with men's work specifically. And I know there's just so much in this space. So I want to give you the opportunity to kind of lay out, like, just talk to me about what it is you're passionate about in terms of working with men. What is driving your mission, and what are you hoping to, change the dial on just, I would say, if we're just talking in binary terms, like the male experience as we're evolving and growing, like talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely another passion of mine in bringing more awareness to men's work and men's healing and men's transformation. And I think the biggest thing right now, what we see, just from a numbers level, I mean, if you look at the number of suicides and men killing themselves, it's a staggering number. I don't have the exact
It's
statistic
astounding.
of 2024, but as last time I checked, I mean, it's a very, very high percentage. And,
Mm-hmm.
Especially amongst the younger generations now, a lot of younger generations are struggling. We can attribute that to many things, social media, the societal programming and conditioning, all of the things that have been happening for years, all of the traumas that, men experience, and women, of course. But, this ties into women, and I'm going to make the correlation here in just a bit. So when you have traumatized young men, you have men that are out of their center, out of their power. They feel weak. They feel hopeless. They feel powerless. You are creating a society in which you have this complete imbalance. And we're seeing it on a mass level right now in so many different ways, specifically, as I just mentioned, when it comes to mental health. And so this work, that I personally do with men, and that there's a huge movement around right now, is bringing men into a space where they can be their raw, real, authentic selves, because most men are hiding inside of themselves and they don't have a healthy outlet to be able to express, because maybe they don't have a parent figure, a father that is emotionally available. And that's the case for a lot of people. It was the case for me, not having that outlet to express in a healthy masculine space. But when you do, when you have a container to be able to be vulnerable and authentic, you begin to release some of that pent up shame, guilt, and anger, which generally and also grief, those are the four core emotions that men are holding inside of themselves. And as a result of being able to release those and to have an outlet and expression for those emotions, we begin to clear the density in all of the stagnation, all of the
Yes.
energy that's been built up. And so, again, for me, the greatest transformations that have come have been in the space of other men. And so, for me, the inspiration of creating Masculine Mastery, which is my podcast and platform, is to give
Mm-hmm.
that voice to men, for them to step into a space where they can let everything go and they don't have to carry the burden. And so, how this ties into women, I think women should really care a lot about men's work, because a lot of the atrocities and the oppression of women have come from imbalanced men that have yet to even find themselves and that aren't doing this inner work. And so supporting men doing this inner work, especially man to man, this creates a more harmonious environment, not only within themselves, but within their relationships. And so begin to do some of that deeper inner child work, that shadow work that's very necessary. And we all need to confront that on a big level. And so I can speak for hours on this topic, but I'll leave it there just to kind of stop and pause. And if there's anything else you want to kind of dive into, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a woman on earth that wouldn't support this type of work because we're craving this evolution in the male experience as well. And so I think we're all proponents for this work. I wanted to ask you, in terms of, we're thinking about men wanting to do this work and like having that shame and that guilt and all of those things that get in the way of them accessing their true selves, or even having the conversations, the raw and vulnerable conversations with somebody. What are some of the barriers you see in your work for guys even taking that first step to say, like, hey, Christopher, I want to come work with you, but I feel like X, Y, and Z is holding me back? What do you hear from men in that perspective? Like, and how can we offer them some compassion and some space here to just take that leap to try to work on this?
That's a great question. There's many barriers to entry that I see. One of the biggest is fear, right? It's like
Yeah.
fear of change, fear of being vulnerable, fear of showing your true self because of what people might think, right? There's many different it's multi-layered, it's multi-dimensional when it comes to the aspect of fear. And I think there's a huge stigma around it still because of the programming that we mentioned before around showing your
Yes.
emotions and all of that. And so there definitely is a little bit of a barrier, but I think for a lot of men, especially now, what I'm seeing is that there's almost this permission slip being granted by the collective energies, because there's a lot of men's spaces beginning to open up where it's like, okay, I know this. Once men take that first step in the door and they get there and they actually reach on the other side and they come into a container or a space, they're like, how did I live without this? I was the same way. One of the biggest things that for me, and I'll speak from my personal experience, has been the mistrust in other men. That is one of the biggest barriers to entry.
Mm.
Men do not trust other men. Men do not trust the masculine, mostly because of the wounded father, the archetype of the wounded father that was not there for them, that maybe abused them in some way. And they perhaps grew up in an environment where there was a lot of egoic competition amongst other men. And so they don't feel safe enough to open around other men. But what they find out is that all the other men feel the same way. So they're all in the space wanting to open together. So again, there's many different aspects we can touch on, but the fear and the mistrust of men are generally the two that I see the most. And really all it comes down to is men being sick and tired of being sick and tired. They're ready for change. And that's when they
Yeah.
can really enter the space with that open heart and say, I'm available for this
Awesome.
transformation.
You just hit on so many really like beautiful points here, and I think it'll be pretty eye-opening to anyone listening to hear these similarities across both genders, of like the mistrust of the gender, the wounded father versus the wounded mother, and how that plays out in our lives. We have so much more in common in our wounded experience that we can use alchemically to transform and integrate ourselves. Like, I love that you said all of those things, because I think they will be a really beautiful, eye-opening experience to anyone listening who doesn't understand this is what men have been going through as well. I wanted to ask you too, in terms of the work that you're doing. So we've all been sold this prescription of the patriarchal male, I would say in Western society, and this very specific prescription of an alpha male. I hate that word myself, but when you think about how men are evolving specifically, what is the future outlook? Where is that going? Could we give it a name? Is there something you guys are calling it? I'm curious about that. And maybe I'm not asking it in the right way here, so I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
No, I really, yeah, I understand what you're trying to get at. And what I would say is like, let's just kind of put it under the umbrella of conscious masculinity or that
Mm-hmm.
sacred warrior archetype, where you do not have the sort of domination, the violence, the control, the force, all of those things that
Yes.
you might see in an imbalanced masculine state.
Mm-hmm.
You have more of like the head and the heart are merged together. You know, you have this place in which there's still this fierceness, but there's this compassion. There's this purpose and direction, but there's this creativity and this intuition. It's the balancing of the masculine and feminine polarities that merge within
Mm-hmm.
the heart space. And so you still have these men that are the protectors, the providers, the ones that are actually going after their dreams, and they are pursuing a higher purpose, a purpose greater than themselves. They're in service to the feminine. They're in service to life. They're in
Mm-hmm.
service to the children, right? And that when men have a higher purpose and they're following that vision, a lot of those other aspects become balanced, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it's not losing that edge, right? It's not like coming to the point where you're just
Yes.
completely soft. You're soft but strong. You're resilient, you're courageous, you're going in the face of adversity and knowing that you're holding a stable center, a grounded core in which you are fully acting and living from your power, not from an ego power, but from a soul power, a power that is felt, that is present, that doesn't need to be spoken, but that can be completely perceived and felt by those around you. It is really the true leader, the conscious leader that is really coming into play. And what I see when men first do the inner work, it takes a while to be able to then transmute all of the negative emotion, the trauma, the wounding that we've experienced. But on the other side of that is exactly what I just mentioned there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay, I thank you for answering that. And I love that you said, like this misconception of going soft, which I think is counterintuitive and probably scares a lot of men because they're afraid that when you talked about the fear back there, there's also a lot of fear about like if I get in touch with myself, like what will I find? And that can be really scary too. I think not just men, but all people. But also I think it's interesting too that when people stand in their power, wherever they are on the gender spectrum here, it allows for a lot of trust in relationship to each other. And I
100%.
love that yeah, and I love that. I feel like that's where it's going, and I feel like we've lost trust in each other, and in order for us to find our way back to each other, if we but all of us stand in our power and in our authenticity and our love, like we can make a really beautiful bridge back to each other. I had one more question in this line here. There was something on your website that you talked about in the masculine mastery work. Um, I think you said lost and seeking a way back home, and I wondered like that disconnection of our shared experience as human beings, not just male or female. How do we meet each other in the middle as we're doing this work? Because it's not overnight. It's not going to happen for everybody. We have a long way to go. So when we think about all of us being lost and seeking a way home to ourselves and to each other, like it's a big question. How do we meet each other in the middle safely and reconnect with everyone?
Yeah, beautiful question again. And, what I feel is really important to state here is that this work that we're doing as men, as women, it's really important that we have those spaces where we can go to as men with other men, where women can go to other
Mm-hmm.
women, and then we can come back into that partnership where we can have these deeply vulnerable conversations and really create a safe space where we can unfold and we can surrender into it, right? And that's the thing
Yeah.
that complain about a lot of women, is that they don't feel safe around other men, and therefore they can't surrender into their feminine essence, and they can't allow that femininity, that true embodied femininity to shine fully. And that's what men desire. But this is what's happening. There's a flip in polarity oftentimes when we're talking about relationship and all of that. So again,
Mm-hmm.
everything is all about the inner work, because the inner work translates to what's happening externally. Everything is a mirror. And so when we
Yes.
begin to come into contact, we begin to touch the depth of our own soul, and we begin to bring self-acceptance and self-love to ourselves, that is when everything begins to change, in ourselves, in our external world, in our relationships, polarity speaking wise. All of that begins to shift on a massive level. So we first need to
Mm-hmm.
come into contact with ourselves, with that true self, that soul. And then from there, we can meet our partners, we can meet our loved ones from that place. And that is when, of course, there's deeper work to be done, because in partnership, everything is a mirror as well. But we need to create the foundational, safe, supportive container for us both to be able to share from our hearts and be able to share from a place of authenticity. And that,
Mm-hmm.
to me, if you have that foundation of trust, of safety in a container, in a relationship, that is when you can really begin to expand to greater heights within yourself and within the relationship.
Yeah, I've experienced that for myself as well. I have a beautiful partner right now, and I feel like I got the messaging very early that I should present masculine and like be ambitious and all of these things and like climb the corporate ladder, and that's been a whole undoing of itself. And then also presenting in that masculine energy allows a somewhat of a protective shell, against the masculine, right? Like that's what we end up doing. And being in partnership, to what you were saying there, is like I have a partner now that shows me that it's okay to drop those defenses and to allow my feminine energy. And it's weird because I feel like never in the course of all of my relationships have I felt so relaxed in my own feminine energy, because he makes me feel safe. And it's
Mm.
really interesting that that happens to us, that if that safety is there and that acceptance is there and he's not asking me to be anything else but myself, it allows me to relax into that. So I love that you said that, because I think in practice that's what it kind of looks like for sure in my relationship. I did want to also talk to you about overcoming core wounds, because I think this is such a big thing for everybody, but particularly one that I had in mind that I really wanted to sort of pick apart with you is this emotional deprivation. I think that happens to all of us at some point in our lives. And also, if we're giving compassion to the people that we're having relational um, experiences with, like not everyone has the landscape of the tools to hold our emotion and hold our experiences. So, that being said, when you think about emotional deprivation, how it manifests in our early childhood experience and in our adult experiences, where do you see like the biggest, I guess, hurdles that people have to come over to get through that emotional deprivation and kind of turn it around?
A wonderful question. One of the things that I see, so actually, I'm going to reverse engineer this so that we can get
Okay.
clear. And I think there's a base level, something I want to preface before we get into that. And so, what I perceive to be these main core wounds, one of the biggest core wounds that we see is the core wound of rejection. Okay, and
Mm-hmm.
so rejection, and we can break this down even further, but rejection manifests in many different ways. Rejection manifests as people pleasing, putting your needs in front of, putting others' needs in front of yourself. It manifests as self sabotage. It manifests as all these different symptoms, right, that we experience in our lives, in our relationships, and so forth. And generally, that rejection wound sets in really quite early, because when you have emotionally unavailable parents or unconscious parents, parents that have yet to have done that inner work, they're
Mm-hmm.
rejecting the child for their emotional expression. So, for example, if I'm getting angry and I'm getting upset and I'm displaying this anger and yelling, most 9 times out of 10 children are told to be quiet or to go in their room and go into timeout, and you're grounded for a week, and all of these things that happen as a result of us expressing ourselves authentically. So what happens over time is that our own emotional expression gets subdued. We bring those emotions inward, we store them in different parts of our body, and then that later manifests as either extreme outbursts, or it goes to the extreme of illness and disease, where we're not actually, the life force energy is not flowing through us. And so when we look at emotional deprivation, that manifests early on through our parents. When you have a parent, when you have someone that is conscious and bringing awareness to it, they're going to allow the child to express as he or she desires. And therefore, that emotion passes through, because emotions are energy, right? But if that energy gets stuck, that creates the turbulence and the chaos internally, and therefore externally within our relationships and so forth. And so that's why the emotional work, and doing specifically the inner child work to address and to go back to that little boy or that little girl that didn't have that safe space to express, it is extremely important, because generally that little girl, that little boy is actually holding us hostage in the past, which then creates our present day experience where we can't actually have those meaningful, fulfilling relationships that we truly desire. And so that's why that work is so incredibly important. Now, for me, personally, I have a 4-year-old son, and I'm grateful that I've been able, and I've been doing this quote unquote inner work for many years now. Now, I'm not going to claim that I'm perfect. There's still times where I get upset and angry, but I do have the awareness at this point, whereas if my son is having an emotional outburst, that most days, 9 times out of 10, I can hold space for it and be patient and allow him and say, get it out, allow yourself to express. And then also having those conversations after to bring emotional intelligence to it and say, hey, I see that you were feeling upset. I see that you were feeling angry. And now he's at the point where he can kind of have those conversations, and name those emotions and why he was feeling that way, because that then creates the intelligence moving forward, where hopefully later on in his life, when he has relationships, there won't be as much of that charge that is happening internally where he doesn't feel safe enough to express. So that was a lot, but it all comes back to healing the core wound of rejection. If we can heal that, as well as the core wound of abandonment, those two core wounds are what control our lives. And so when we heal those, we actually dissolve all of the things that may be manifesting on top of that, as far as what we might call symptoms. But a lot of times when we go to therapy or anything like that, people want to heal the symptoms. It's just like going to the doctor and the doctor telling you that you need to put a Band-Aid on the wound. It's like, yes, that might help stop the bleeding, but it's not actually stopping the underlying cause of what's happening. So I like to go to the core of what's going on there.
So interesting, because it is so multi-layered, and a lot of us, at least these last few generations, that didn't grow up with conscious parents, or even parents that were remotely interested in understanding an emotional reaction. My parents are in their 80s, mid 80s, and emotions was not something, they still can't handle them to this day, and it's not something that they were ever taught to integrate into themselves. And so going back, like you said, to the root cause, and investigating that inner child work at the beginning is so crucial to understanding how it's manifesting as an adult. Because a lot of times too, you didn't say this outright, but I think it's in between everything you said there. When it comes out sideways, this emotional deprivation as adults, it's all happening on a subconscious level, unless we're doing the work, right? So we don't know why we're doing things. I definitely had a big abandonment wound myself to deal with. I was given up for adoption. And so like it always showed up in romantic partnership. Like that was a really big and scary thing. But until I started doing this work, I didn't understand like the connection, right? And so it's so important to go back to that and then see how it comes out in our adult life, because there is that connection. So I love that you said all of that. And the rejection piece of it too is huge. I think rejection to me feels like one of those things that we don't talk enough about. Like there's so much shame about if you feel rejected or you have felt rejected in life, and the story you tell yourself about that rejection is so interesting to me that I feel like we still, some of us still feel so much shame around that. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that.
Yeah, I can definitely touch on rejection. It's a big one, and you just touch on abandonment too, and kind of another aspect or component of all of this, which manifests later in our relationships, is our attachment styles, right? When we have
Yes.
anxious, we have avoidant, we have anxious avoidant, we have secure attachment, right? Ideally, we get to the place where we have a secure
Yes.
attachment, and that's really the relationship we had with our parents is the same exact relationship we carry into our intimate partnerships. And if someone
Yeah.
can understand that, that's extremely important, because then you
That's a
have the
big clue.
context. Exactly. What you have the context of what's actually happening there. So, rejection in itself, I described a few examples, right? I described the parents rejecting the child as for their emotional expression. It can also look like a parent, or even anybody. You're on a sports team, for example, and you get cut from the sports team, or you don't get the job, you don't get the person you wanted, right? All of these things, these rejections that happen throughout life, they create this turmoil inside of us where we don't feel good enough, right? So there
Yeah.
lies the inadequacy and the insecurity. And that inadequacy and insecurity, when we don't feel worthy or we don't feel good enough, that really festers and creates a lot of disturbance, right? And so what are we going to do as a result of that? We're going to be out in the world trying to be validated, trying to prove ourselves time and time again, trying to win the award or win the attention of
Yeah.
others. And this is exhausting, and it creates this loop internally that it really, honestly, it creates so much disturbance where our lives, we feel completely out of balance with ourselves. And so again, inadequacy, insecurity all come from that rejection wound. And we can continue to go down the rabbit hole, because I explore this with my clients all the time. And we start to unwind the energy that's there. And we begin to bring worthiness, love, acceptance, forgiveness into ourselves. And when we begin to bring those energies into ourselves, we begin to drop the armor, drop the barriers that have been built up over time, all of the masks that we wear, all of those things we do to try to be seen, heard, and loved by others, that doesn't matter as much. And we feel this depth of wholeness within ourselves. And when we feel that, we actually become magnetic to those experiences in which others begin to see us for who we are, and so forth. And so again, it's such a deep rabbit hole, but I'm very, very passionate about this conversation.
Yeah, and I think you hit on such a good point that I feel like if you do the healing work for it, when you understand the energy expend to hustle for validation, it's just like unbelievable. And all of us do it if we have that rejection in us, like, we're seeking the love of somebody or the attention of somebody or the validation of like, oh, did we do good enough? Are we smart enough? Are we beautiful enough? Like put anything in there. I think
Mm.
it's so interesting how that energy expend and that resource on ourselves, like on our physical, mental, spiritual selves, when we hustle to be loved and not rejected, is so enormous. And I think if anyone can do that work to undo that in themselves, it's life changing. And I feel like,
I couldn't agree more. It's so important. And I think there's a lot of, one last thing I'll say around this. There's a lot of
yeah,
a lot of people, when they hear healing work and inner work, they feel like it's got to be really hard, right? And yes, you have to
yeah,
confront your shadows and your darkness, and there's certain things that you have to see and you have to realize and you have to bring light and awareness to. But at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is finding that place within yourself where you can forgive yourself and forgive others for everything that's happened, and know that life is not happening to you, it's happening through you. And when you begin to bring acceptance to your life experience, and you begin to bring acceptance to all of the pain that you've experienced, and shine that light of love onto those places that hurt the most, that is when the true transformation can happen. And it's literally just a process of letting go, of shedding the layers and surrendering into who you truly are, which is the wholeness, the prosperity, the love that we've alluded to before. And so again, it's multifaceted, but I don't want to make it seem like this work is unapproachable.
Well, yeah, and the word healing is very heavy, and most people just want to run for the hills, like, and everybody wants a quick um,
Yeah.
outcome as well too. So along with the compassion and the acceptance, it requires of us a deep level of patience with ourselves to work through all of the things. I didn't want to skip over to one really big point that I almost did skip over here, and just want to get your thoughts on this. Like, so we're talking about, we're verbalizing a lot of this stuff in this healing work, but a lot of it is also connected to our physical body, because we do store the trauma, we do store the experiences. Like, when we don't express what happens to us, it still lives in our molecules and in our DNA. So I didn't want to skip over that. And I don't know if you want to say anything in particular about, taking a holistic approach and taking care of ourselves, whether it's trauma related or not, when we think about coming into our bodies and offering our bodies also respite from the pain and everything that we've accumulated as adults.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And sometimes when we get in these conversations, you forget certain aspects. So I'm glad you brought that up. So a big part of the work that I do is somatic work, meaning working with the body's intelligence, because as you mentioned, the body does store everything. It stores all memory. And when we begin to tune in with our bodies, we begin to bring a light of wisdom to the table that oftentimes, a lot of people want to go straight to the mind, right? But the problem can't be solved from the mind. It has to be, you have to go through the body to get to the depth of the unconscious and subconscious mind. And so a practice, which maybe this is a good point to get very practical here, because I think a lot of times we can talk about these things, but when we don't bring groundedness or practicality to it, it can be like, okay, well, you told me all this, but what the fuck do I do? Right. So it's like, let's bring some practicality to this. So what I like to do with people first is like get them in touch with their bodies, right? So what someone can do listening to this is just to pause for a moment, closing down your eyes and just taking a few slow, deep breaths and just allowing the rhythm of your breath to settle down some of your energy, some of the overthinking, some of the tension or the tightness that's in your body. And as you begin to breathe deep, I always ask people to bring awareness to the parts of themselves that are feeling out of balance. So, for example, a lot of people carry tension, they carry stress, overwhelm in different aspects of their body. Maybe it's in the gut, in the stomach. Maybe there's a tightness there. Maybe there's a constriction in the heart space. Maybe it's in the shoulder. Wherever it is that constriction lies, I want you to bring attention and energy to it. And what that simply means is by bringing your breath to that area. And as you're breathing in through your nose and breathing out of your mouth, just going into that feeling just for a moment. There may be some uncomfortability around that. There may be a little bit of discomfort, but just trusting your body and going into wherever that constriction, that tightness, or that tension lies. And once you've gone there, you can begin to talk to it. You can begin to have a dialogue with it. And even a dialogue with yourself. What are you feeling? What are the sensations? Getting even more detailed into the sensations you're feeling. Yes, there might be a tightness, a tension, or constriction, but what does it feel like? Does it feel like a shooting pain? Does it feel like you're being stabbed with like a sharp object? Does it feel like a black cloud? What does it feel like? What are the sensations? Is there a tingling? Is there a numbing sensation? What are the sensations that you feel in that specific area? What are the emotions? Is there an emotion attached to it? Oftentimes, if we're working with our belly, with our solar plexus, this is where we hold a lot of worry and fear. If we're working with our heart space, this is where we hold a lot of sadness and grief. So just tuning in, is there an emotion present for you? Maybe you can't find that right away. Maybe you can. If you can, asking the emotion, talking to the emotion. Fear. What are you trying to tell me? Sadness. What are you trying to tell me? Anger. What are you trying to tell me? Our emotions offer us messages. They offer us guidance. They're not here to harm us. They're here to provide us with insight. And when we can begin to have dialogue with these emotions, we begin to understand why they're present. The perpetual worry, the perpetual anxiety that you feel, there's a message in that for you. And as you breathe, as you continue to slow down your breath, tuning into a color, is there a color associated with this emotion? What is the color there? Is there an image, a symbol? As detailed as you can get into this. And as you do that, you begin to breathe and continue to find that rhythm of breath. And all of this can be traced back then into a certain incident, a situation, a challenge, a trauma, an adversity that you faced in your life. What are some of those things that created this energy to be stuck in this specific area? And then simply, lastly, here, just bringing acceptance or forgiveness, love to this part of you. And what I like to do is to envision a color. What does love represent to you in a color? What does it represent to you in a feeling? And you can use your breath to breathe in this color, this light, this frequency into that area and allow that to fully, that energy to lessen, to be transmuted, to be alchemized, to be transformed. And of course, this is a practice that we do all the time. We bring, the more we do that, the more energy we bring to that, more love we bring to that, the more that energy begins to transform and transmute. And so all of this work that we do is coming back to that place in which we can come back into balance, we can come back into peace. And so when you're ready, you can open your eyes, you can survey your environment, just notice if you're feeling any different, any sensations that may have changed within yourself, any shift of energy that you've had. So that's a good place to start. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I could feel my body immediately relax as soon as you started talking. So thank you for walking the audience through that. I think that's beautiful. I also think it's really beautiful when we put our attention on our body because we were all constantly running away from our body and how it responds to that attention. It's like it's yearning for us to pay attention to it. It's really interesting.
Exactly. It holds all the keys. When we can go into that and do that, that's where we begin to see the differences and the shifts and changes in our life. And so very, very important point there.
Yeah. So we're at the end here. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to give you some space to tell all of the people where they can find you. If you've got anything coming up that you want to tell people about, conferences, retreats, anything you have going on, this is your space to do that. And then we'll wrap up with some gratitude.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I have many different platforms and websites and all of that, but everything can be found on my main website at christopheraugust.co, and then also on Instagram at Christopher_August. All of my breathwork can be accessed through there. We have another site, beatsinbreath.com. That's where you can download our free mobile app, iOS and Android. We have Masculine Mastery website that has all the information on it as well. But on my personal website, all the links to all of those different things can be found, including my personal coaching work and the different things I do there. So yeah, overall, just extremely grateful for this conversation and happy to support and be in service in any way that is needed for anybody out there that's going through certain things right now that needs that support, that needs that anchor, that container. I'm always happy to be of service. So thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I always check in with my guests and ask them, like, what 3 things are they grateful for in this moment, this week, this year? Anything
Mm.
that's rolling around in that heart chakra space.
There's a lot to be grateful for. And I would say the first thing that I always comes to mind is my breath and being here, being alive in this human experience. And the breath is that beautiful place to start for me when it comes to gratitude, that I'm breathing, that all is well, that yes, there might be chaos happening. Yes, there might be different points of stress and all these different things I have to manage in my business. But if I'm breathing, I'm prospering, I'm well. So that's number one. Number two, very grateful for my son, for my family, for all my loved ones, all my relations, all the people that are here supporting me supporting them. I'm grateful for that and grateful for my mission. I'm grateful to be of service and to be sharing healing and to be supporting people in their transformation and their process and to be on my mission, to be in my purpose and to be growing this beautiful baby that I'm growing in beats and breath and spreading the power of breath to the world. So there's many more to be grateful for, but those are the first 3 things that come to mind.
I had a wonderful time with you. I think that you made my job very easy because you're so well versed and educated and articulate in how you explain everything. And I think this will be a great interview for people to learn some more things. And I really appreciate the work you're doing, especially in the field of men and all of that. Like I said, we all want the world to wake up anywhere on the spectrum, the gender spectrum, and to be healed and integrated so we can live more harmoniously with each other. I pray for that every day.
Yeah, thank you for your time and for your wisdom and for everything that you're sharing, and appreciate the platform. And wish you nothing but prosperity and success in all your endeavors.
Oh, thanks, Christopher. And also, great name, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Christopher, it was wonderful talking to you.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Ziomata, in alignment with Light Casting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.